Chapter 12. They couldn't watch her ships that night after all. Mr. Colgan had borrowed Graham's robot for night crabbing, and Mr. Orban was caulking the bottom of his. Want to go to the movie instead, Lily asked Albert when she caught up with them on the Orban's porch. Well, we won't stay for the whole thing, she told him. We'll just sneak in and watch until 8:30. A little eyes and ears of the world news, and she tried to remember the newest movie at Cross Bay. She had seen 2 minutes of it the other day before the matron had caught her and marched her outside, blinking into the sunshine. How much does it cost, he asked. Not a cent, I told you. We're sneaking in. She could see he looked worried. Unless you're afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. Well then, Action in the North Atlantic was the name of the movie. It was about the troop ships crossing the ocean and German submarines following along. She shivered a little thinking about those ships. Mrs. Sherman had just pinned up another poster over a pile of raisin rings. Someone talked, it said in big red letters on top, and underneath was a ship sinking. So you saw only the bow, and sailors trying to swim away in waves that were as high as mountains. Lily tried not to think about it. Instead, she walked down the street in front of Albert. They turned in at the alley on one side of the Cross Bay Theater. The alley was filled with itchy weeds that smelled. She could see Albert lifting his skinny legs as high as he could, but she just rushed right through the weeds and around to the back. It's hot as a poker in the balcony, she told him. They always leave the door open up there. Albert stopped when he saw the fire escape stairs. They'd have to climb. Don't be silly, she said, knowing what he was thinking. Don't look down. It must be 2 stories, he said. You can fall right through those steps. It looks as if those steps will pull off the side of the wall. 3 stories, she said, daring him. I'm not afraid, he said. I'm just telling you. She started to climb without answering. She had done this every summer since she was 6, up those stairs 1,000 times. The stairs were rickety, she had to admit, and the screws holding them to the wall looked rusty as anything. Wouldn't you think the guy who owned the movie would polish things up once in a while? She looked back over her shoulder at Albert. He was holding onto the railing for dear life, as Graham would say, stopping each second to close his eyes and take a breath. Race you to the top, she said. He opened his eyes. Sure. She grinned. He was a tough kid, that Albert. The balcony door was open just wide enough for them to crawl through. She sank down on the top step next to the door to watch, with Albert sliding in next to her breathless. That was so simple, he said. She leaned over. We made it just in time for Bugs Bunny. He grinned back. What's up, Doc? He said. She started to laugh. What? He asked. It's your voice. It sounds so Hungarian, he said. It is a Hungarian Bugs Bunny. She liked the way he laughed, the way he talked. She kept smiling to herself as they leaned back against the step to watch Bugs Bunny chomping on a carrot, falling off a cliff. They had a perfect spot. In fact, they had the whole balcony to themselves. Not one person was up there. If they had paid, if Poppy had been with her, she would have been able to go downstairs to the candy stand and buy a cup of popcorn or some peanut chews. If she tried it now, that is, if she'd still had her tan purse with money, the matron with her flashlight would be right there to pounce on her. And then it was time for the picture. Words. Music. The noise was deafening. Lily sat there for a while. She watched one of the ships sink and the sailors trying to hold on to little pieces of wood or to swim away, just like the poster in Mrs. Sherman's bakery. And she thought of Poppy. They had heard from him again, but only a postcard. She had missed the mailman that day, and the card had slid into the slot in the door, and it had been there all morning until Graham had spotted it. Never so tired, never worked so hard. To be ready to go overseas. Thinking of you both in Rockaway makes me happy. Makes it all worthwhile. Love, Poppy. Lily watched one of the sailors' arms raised go under the water, and then she didn't watch anymore. Albert wasn't watching either. Don't you like the movie, she asked. He shook his head. We could leave, she began, and broke off. She could see the balcony stairs and the beam from the matron's flashlight bouncing up toward them. I was on a ship like that, Albert said. She blinked. Of course. How else had he gotten here? She'd never thought of that. The matron was halfway up the stairs now looking at them, a frown on her face. Albert, Lily began. Are you here again? The matron asked. I told you last time it's dangerous to climb those steps, and you can't keep coming in here when you don't pay. It was one thing when you were 6 years old, but... Lily circled around her with Albert following and went down the balcony steps to the first floor. They passed the candy counter and the glass stand with the popcorn piled up on top and went out the door. Behind them was the sound of the movie, and in the marquee's light she could see Albert's face, his blue eyes swimming in tears. She stood there for a moment, wanting to ask him, wanting to know about the ship, wanting to know what had made him cry. Then she heard the church chimes. It's 9 o'clock, she said. Grandma's going to have a fit. They started to run, crossing the street diagonally, just missing an old Chevy with its headlights blackened, its horn blaring at them. They raced past Mrs. Sherman's. Same cookies, Albert said, breathless, and then around the corner of As Good as New shop, with the dusty hat and coat, the flute and the violin. By the time they reached the back road, Lily had a pain in her chest and a stitch in her side, and Albert wasn't crying anymore. They were both laughing, and he grabbed her hand and pulled her along until they reached the back door. "Tomorrow," Lily called after him. "See you tomorrow." "Yes," he said, going toward the Orbans. She went into the house thinking about tomorrow, thinking about asking him all the things she wanted to know. Graham was in the kitchen making iced tea, and she poured some for Lily. "I was getting a little worried," she said. "I was with Albert," Lily said. Graham nodded at her. "Good. I'm glad." Lily went into her bedroom with a glass of lukewarm iced tea and a sprig of mint from Mrs. Colgan's Victory Garden. She bent over to run her fingers across her mother's stars, pasted in a neat row, still thinking about tomorrow.